Well, a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so I'll throw away all that, and I'm just going to ad-lib a bit. First of all, to put my role in perspective, I am a full-time official for the GMB Trade Union, the international officer, as Ben said. I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to say thank you for inviting me once more. Always a pleasure to come up this way. My relationship with Fair Trade is that I'm a trade union representative on the board of the Fair Trade Foundation. I suppose I could say I'm Ian Bretman's boss, so we shouldn't disagree with me too much. And we've become more and more involved with fair trade as the demand for fair trade products has got bigger, and it's extended into our natural territory, which is that of high labour. I think it's very appropriate to have a campaign around the Olympics, because we've heard about the Olympic Charter, haven't we? Well, I think the Olympics has got as far away from the Olympic Charter as you can think. It's a corporate jamboree, isn't it? And there's no money to spend on welfare, is there? But we can spend billions and billions and billions on bread and circuses, putting this thing in the East End of London for what is it, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, with the excuse it's going to regenerate that part of the world. Well, I'd rather just regenerate that part of the world and left the Olympics to one side, actually. And despite a bit of propaganda, that's what most people think. And I'm not just being bitter because they're going to put my football club in there afterwards, either. That's nothing to do with it. But on a more serious note, I've been asked to talk about fair trade, if it can be a tool towards decent work. But I think we need to qualify what we mean by decent work, and I think Sam mentioned it, or it was on one of the video DVDs there. But I dug up a quote from the ILO, which is where the term came from. I think it was first mentioned back in around 1999 in the Director General's report to the International Labour Conference. And this definition included, and this is just a capitalist mode of production, you understand, quote, productive work under conditions of freedom, equity, security and dignity in which rights are protected and adequate remuneration and social coverage are provided. Well, you know, that sums it up, doesn't it? I think if you have all those things, you wouldn't be too badly off. So if that's what we mean by decent work, as the previous speakers have said, there's pressure to slip a little bit about in the world. And I think at this juncture, it might be just worth looking at the world trading system a little bit more, just to see exactly where the problems lie. Well, the problems are, and a lot of people won't say this, and I make no bones about saying it, the problems are an economic model based on unsustainable modes of production and the accumulation of capital. I mean, capitalism benefits the few at the expense of the many, and it's simple as that. And I think as Keith suggested, we live now in the age of neoliberal capitalism, which I think goes back, we can probably say about 30 years. And a number of trends have emerged from that era, not least of which is we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich since the Depression, and that has accelerated during the last 5 years, despite the crisis that we're supposed to be in, the economic crisis. That alarmingly, 60% of people seem to believe that we have to pay enormous amounts of money back. Companies have never made such big profit, multinational companies. But there's a particular trend that I think is quite worrying, because there's the old saying, isn't it, that history repeats itself first as tragedy, then as farce. I was reading an article the other week by an Argentinian economist whose name escapes me for a minute, but he was highlighting the dangers of an economic model for the global south, what used to be called the third world, of taking out raw materials. It's completely based on taking raw materials from the south to the north, because there's an insatiable demand for raw materials in the global north, and there's an awful lot of money being made. If you take the example of his country, for example, there is an absolute boom in soybean production. Yeah? And there's one or two very strange statistics come out of it. Everything's been converted to soybean. So Argentina, as I'm sure you'll know, is renowned for its production of beef. It has some of the most fertile tracts of land in the world. And in fact, its people ate more beef per urbanisation than anywhere else until recently. They've now been overtaken. They've now been overtaken by Uruguay, which in a way is neither here nor there. But what is more startling is a spokesperson for the Sociedad Rural, the very conservative organisation that represents the agricultural sector there, said in a short period of time, Argentina will become a net importer of beef. Now, I think that's absolutely staggering. And the reason for this, as I said, everything's been converted to soya. People have been thrown off the land because you don't what you need to grow soya. You put it in the ground, you'd absolutely bombard it with chemicals, aerial spraying. It's going to probably terminally damage some of the best land on the planet. And where does all this stuff go? It goes to China to a large extent because the Chinese diet is changing slowly. They're now starting to eat in the style of a Western person as opposed to their own diet. It can't be fed to humans. So what does it do? It goes to feed cattle in China. Right? So they're cutting beef production in Argentina to grow soya to feed their cows, and you can bet your bottom dollar one day they'll be importing beef back from China into Argentina. Yeah? Similarly, he made the point about the extractive industry. If you go further up South America, places like Bolivia, the Andean countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, there is a mining boom. Foreign multinational companies, a lot of Chinese capital are there, are moving in, copper mines, lead mines, you name it. They are extracting raw materials from Latin America. This has generated a huge polemic, even in countries with governments we consider more progressive, such as in Ecuador, where, as you know, there was a failed coup last week. And I think, as the economist said, it's just repeating itself. He belongs to a school called the dependency theorists, which some of you may have heard of, who said way back in the 1960s that there was just no future in this, because the price of commodities isn't determined at the point of sale. The price of commodities is determined in financial markets in the USA, in London, and in other Western capitals. And what was advocated by the dependency theories back in the 1960s was something called import substitution industrialisation. Juan Perón at the time, the Perón administration, was a great advocate of this. Wanted to make sure there was food sovereignty, wanted to make sure that things were produced locally, decent jobs for people. But of course, that goes completely against the interests of Western and multinational companies. And the last couple of days before I came here, I was actually on a conference about free trade. And some of the things I heard there, even though I like to think I know a little bit about trade already, some of the things I heard there were quite frankly, were incredible. I think David Cameron at the Conservative Party conference said yesterday, he said that the Conservative Party, this Conservative Liberal government, is going to oversee the biggest transfer of control from governments to people. Well, he was half right. What we are seeing is the biggest transfer of control from government, but not the people, but the multinational corporations. Because when they talk about free trade, actually, it's got very little to do with free trade. You ask the man and woman in the street what they think trade is, they think it's just the exchange of goods, don't they? It stops at the border. Well, this isn't about trade at all. This is giving multinational control of every facet of people's lives. Now, little test for you. Most of your activists, I think, of one sort or another, otherwise you wouldn't be here. How many of you know that the European Union is going to sign a free trade agreement with Canada? Hands up. Jesus, somebody must know. How many of you know the European Union is going to sign a free trade agreement with India? See? Now that's frightening. You're intelligent, informed people. Well, I'll tell you, both these things are going to happen. There's been a big campaign in Canada, because it has been publicised there. Canada is already part of something called, which you may have heard of, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, as Noam Chomsky once put it, the only two true words in that phrase are North and American. Yeah? Because there was no agreement, it's not about trade, it certainly wasn't free. Because in that particular agreement, corporations have the power to sue nations. All right? Let's think about that. So, because there's an obligation to open the markets up of any particular country for procurement, so be it for health, for schools, etc. And if they don't do it and a company wants to buy, they can actually sue the country. There's actually a Canadian mining company called the Pacific Rim Company, and it wanted to open a mine in El Salvador. They did some survey to see about the feasibility and environmental analysis. And the Salvadorian government, who's got a relatively progressive president, a chap by the name of Funes at the moment, says, no, actually, we don't think it's going to work. It's not safe. Now, what Kennedy decided to do, and not a member of the Central American, he's not a member of any trade agreement, it used a US subsidiary to sue the Salvadorian government for not letting them put the mine there. And that's the sort of thing that's contained in the North American Free Trade Agreement. They're suing the Salvadorian government, I forget about how many $100 million. It's a lot of money for a little republic like El Salvador, peanuts for the Pacific Rim Mining Company. So, if the European Union signs a treaty with Canada, binds the